You're cutting out. Can you repeat that? Go for production. Go for production. I said go for production.
That's right. You're listening to a podcast about TV and film production. Join us as we converse with industry leaders and gain insight into their strategies, their systems, and best practices in bringing a script to life. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your host, Brendan Riley.
Today we are talking with Nick Thomas, location manager extraordinaire. Nick has worked on shows such as Cloak and Dagger, Fonzo, Bad Moms, Free State of Jones, did I get that correct? And countless other indies. Nick has a degree in film studies from Wesleyan. Anything else we should know about you, Nick?
There's plenty, but I'm sure we'll get into it along the way. I want to say thank you for getting my full title correct. People tend to leave off the extraordinaire part, but it's important to me.
I mean, I think this goes back to the idea that location manager is often a thankless job, would you say, sometimes?
Oh, I've never really thought about it that way. Yes. No, I think that's absolutely the case, and I try not to lament that too much, but it's sort of part of the nature of the job itself is we end up kind of taking care of, the job description is such that you end up kind of taking care of and coordinating and handling a lot of the behind the scenes elements that people don't think of when they think of film production, and even people who work in film production don't necessarily think of. So yeah, for that reason alone, it ends up being somewhat thankless because it's not the glitzy, glamorous side of film production. It's sort of the nitty gritty stuff that needs to get taken care of in order for a film shoot to run smoothly.
Yeah, I mean, if a scene is amazing in a show or a movie, nobody's coming up to you and saying, man, that scene looked amazing. Thanks for getting that location.
Yeah. And I mean, even within that, I think the locations side of it, just the location scouting, is the sort of more glamorous side of it, but it makes up it makes up a percentage, but not the whole picture of what our job is. We find the locations, and then beyond that, it comes down to, the signing the contracts and negotiating the deals and finding the parking and doing the permits with the city. So there's just so much that goes into it that, doesn't show up on the screen. And I will occasionally get complimented on the actual locations in a film or TV show that I've worked on. Now, people are biased because they know they're talking to someone who worked on finding the locations. But that part actually does show up on the screen, and a lot of what we do does not.
During your day, you've got a lot to figure out, a lot to organize and manage. What is the typical day like of a location manager?
Well, I guess I would say part of what makes that question difficult to answer is a lot of what I, what I actually really enjoy and appreciate about my job is just the fact that every day kind of looks different to me. I mean, I could wake up for 5 a.m. to be on set to help open set at 6 a.m., but on the next day I could be waking up and piling in a van with 12 other people to go scout locations, and the next day I could be waking up and, getting in my car and driving around solo to scout locations or meet up with location owners to negotiate the contract and what have you. So they're really, and then, the next day I'm sitting at a desk in front of my computer, which is not the most exciting part of my job, but, what makes it and keeps it interesting is that there isn't really a normal day for someone who works in locations. It's kind of different day by day.
When you think about the rest of the film crew, a lot of them are there on set from start to finish. They're there at wrap, and but your job's kind of fluid. You can kind of come in, leave, go see a movie. Just kidding.
No, I could if I chose to. And that's, yeah, I'm not tied to set every single hour of every single day. And not a day goes by that I don't thank a higher power that I don't necessarily believe in for that fact, because I personally would go a little bit crazy having to be on set all the time. But, it's it's one of the cool and special things about this industry is it's so collaborative, and regardless of what job any given crew member is doing, and whether they're on set or whether they're out ahead of the film crew prepping a location, or in the office, it's you kind of working in the industry. At least speaking for myself, every day I'm kind of reminded of how collaborative a process it is and how important that is, and that's kind of one of the really special things about it for me.
Thinking about your job and your team, talk to us about the descriptions of your team. Like, what is an ALM? What is a location assistant?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'll say that the job descriptions probably end up being somewhat fluid depending on the location manager, depending on the project. I try to start a project by kind of defining roles for various people within my department, based on strengths and weaknesses. But even within that, it ends up being a little bit fluid. An assistant location manager, or ALM, essentially is a person who kind of a manager who, let's see, the best way to explain it is, while I'm kind of managing from the big picture perspective more often and dealing with the above the line personnel, the production manager and director and production designer on down, the assistant location manager is sort of managing on a location by location basis and handling more of the day-to-day elements of working in locations. But even within that, it stays fluid, and that's just part of the job. Is you have to be ready to kind of improvise along the way. And occasionally I'll be handling something on set while an assistant location manager of mine is driving around in the car with the production designer.
And talk about a location assistant. What is that job detail?
The location assistant spends more of his or her time on set with the filming crew and handles the on-set production stuff. Now, occasionally, we'll still pull a location assistant off set to help us go flyer a neighborhood, which essentially means communicating with and informing a neighborhood we're going to be filming in of our impending presence. But essentially and generally, a location assistant will spend more of his or her time on set, and they'll, be setting up the pop-up tents for the film crew, and they'll be making sure that, things are where they're supposed to be, and trucks are parked safely on the film set, and they'll be there as a liaison between the production and the surrounding neighborhood, whether it's residential or commercial or whatnot. They're sort of a face. Locations from top to bottom, including myself, acts as the face of the production to a large degree when it comes to public relations on set. So when we get an angry neighbor, they're coming to us first, or even if they don't come to us first, whoever they go to is directing them to us. So we essentially end up handling a lot of the interpersonal relations between, the public and whatever neighborhood we're filming in.
So going back to your crew and your team, how do you decide how many, like, let's say, location assistants to have, or is that based on the budget or the complexity of the day?
No, I think it's, it'll depend on the budget of the project and certainly, yes, on the complexity of, any given location or project. And there's generally some degree of, at the beginning of a production, I'll work with the production manager to kind of determine what my departmental needs are for that project. What, it's a location heavy project that we're moving every day, or we have, 4 or 5 locations every week. I'm going to need, more assistant location managers and location assistants for that kind of job. If it's something where we spend, 3 weeks in one location, then it's, I can probably scale down my staff or something like that. From one project to the next, I think I'll end up with a department from anywhere from 5 to 10 people on it, and it'll just depend on the project.
So when you're talking about going back to your team, how do you go about, choosing this person and building that team? Are they people you've worked with before that they recommended from the production manager?
Generally, I try to work with people that I've worked with before, just because in this job, which is ever changing and ever evolving and ever surprising, it's really helpful for me personally to have people who, I'm comfortable working with, and I know, this is this person's strength and this perhaps isn't. So I know how to kind of divvy up the duties and the tasks. But it's always, I don't always have the luxury of just employing the same people on every given job. And that's, it ends up being a blessing more than a curse, because you add people to your Rolodex, so to speak, in terms of, I have more people that I'm comfortable working with and comfortable calling up on the phone if I need someone to help out on set or scouting or flyering or with office stuff. I have more people that I'm comfortable working with now than I did a year ago, and certainly more than I did 3 or 4 years ago. And I've been working in locations in New Orleans. I've been working in locations for about 7 years, and really just managing for the last 2 or 3. So it's certainly still something that I'm figuring out who I want to work with, and what each individual person, what their strengths are.
What you're saying earlier about people you've worked with before, I always tell people that people want to work with people they know, and it's a very simple idea. And that when you're first starting out, it's really difficult because you don't know anybody. So it's, how do you get to know those few people? Got to be creative sometimes.
Yeah, you do. And I think, there's the benefit for me, not me personally, but working in film production in New Orleans. It's a fairly close-knit community. So, for instance, right now I'm starting up on a new project. I'm looking for someone to scout locations, and I was just texting around and calling around to friends / coworkers today, asking just for suggestions. Hey, do you know who might be available right now and be a good scout for this particular job? And that's the thing too. I'm scouting for a particular thing on this project, and certain people are going to be better at scouting for that than they would. Like, for instance, one scout's going to be better at scouting for a farmhouse in, some rural area of Louisiana. And another person's going to be better at scouting for, a modern office in downtown New Orleans. Not that I wouldn't employ the same person for both of those things, but it is interesting to kind of along the way see different people's strengths and different people's weaknesses. As far as networking and everything, yeah, I guess what I was starting to say before I got sidetracked is I've never considered myself as someone for whom networking is a strong point, and it's something that at various points along my career I've kind of tried to get better at and feel more natural doing. I don't think I've ever fully succeeded at that. But I also appreciate the fact that I work in the film industry in New Orleans. It's not a huge city. It's not Los Angeles. And, I know a lot of the people who work in the film industry. And if there's someone who I should be working with that I don't know personally, chances are, by this same time next year, another guy or gal I work with will have put me in touch with that person, and I'll have gotten the opportunity to work with them. So it is a close-knit community, and that's a pretty cool thing. People know each other and help each other out along the way.
So going back to scouting for locations, you were talking about trying to find certain locations. That to me is probably one of the most creative parts of your job. Am I correct?
That's right.
So if you think about this idea of you're reading a script and you read the line, this house is about to be burned down, in the movie, or there's a really cool alleyway and a drug deal goes down. Your mind starts thinking about possible locations. How do you go about finding the perfect location for that scene?
Sure. Well, I'll go back a second and just correct one thing you said. Scouting for locations is the creative aspect of my job. It's not the most creative. It's the only one, because after that I'm figuring out where to put the shitter, and I'm figuring out how many security guards we need on a day-to-day basis. So it is, I appreciate that side of my job very much, and it's the most fun part. I have a lot of fun day by day doing whatever I'm doing, whatever phase of production we're in. But scouting is fun. It's still high pressure and it's still stressful, but you're driving around looking for locations, oftentimes a needle in the haystack, and that can be pretty exciting and fun and feel, legitimately feel like an adventure, which is, something that not everybody gets to say in their job, is that, come home from work at the end of the day and feel like you went on an actual adventure that day. As far as, you asked my methodology for scouting locations.
Yes. What is your process, or do you even have one, or do you just, is every location a new adventure of, okay, I'm going to go find this location?
Right. Yeah, it does. It depends on the location, and certainly I'll read a script and there'll be a party in a big ballroom, and for something like that, while it's not, it's still fun to scout that stuff. There's 20, 25, 30 locations in the city of New Orleans, which I immediately know this scene is probably going to end up at one of these few locations. And most of those I have photos of that I can do, just call up the contact over there and check on availability. So those are the more kind of not cookie cutter, but those are the ones that come up over and over again. Certain houses, you read in a script, the hero house matches a certain description, and you're like, oh, this is one of these 10, 15 houses that we've filmed at a bunch of times before. I'm not trying to make my job sound any less exciting or glamorous than it is, but that's just the reality. There's, locations that have gotten used before and will get used again, and I'm not shy in reading a script about saying, yeah, this is probably going to end up being in one of these places. Now, outside of that, what's a lot more fun and fulfilling for me is finding a location that maybe hasn't been scouted before and certainly hasn't been filmed before. And as far as methodology, sure, it changes based on the location, but you kind of start off, you're looking for a house that's not specifically a Southern style house. So, okay, I know I'm looking, in these few neighborhoods, and not in these other neighborhoods, because if I go over here, it's mainly going to be Southern style houses that, whether the project, TV show or movie, whether it takes place in New Orleans or whether it's New Orleans 4 somewhere else, that will largely define where I'm going to go to scout for these things, because certain neighborhoods look like anywhere USA or Middle America, whereas certain areas, certain stretches of road look very quintessential New Orleans. Google Earth is my best friend. I'm on Google Earth all the time, scrolling around, looking, at the footprints of houses. I need a house that's, kind of wooded and feels a little bit more secluded. I'm looking for that on Google Earth. Looking for a house with a pool. You can find that on Google Earth. Outside of that, on this last project I just did, just wrapped up, one of our main filming locations was the main character's family's home, and I found that house literally by driving up and down streets in New Orleans. Ended up at a house on Esplanade Avenue, one of the more prominent or just iconic avenues in New Orleans, but ended up at a house that the homeowners, that house had never been filmed before. The homeowners had never had filming before. I just kind of drove by and liked the look of the house from the outside, and knocked on the door and talked about it with the owners, and they were open to it. They were cautious but open to it. Whether they would ever do it again, I'm not sure. But yeah, so it really depends. Every location and every script is kind of different in terms of how I go about finding it. But certainly those are the ones that at the end of the day are the most fulfilling for me, is to have gone out and found a location that nobody's photographed before and nobody's scouted, and put that in front of a production designer, put that in front of a director, and have that be the chosen location in the end. That's really fun.
So there's this percentage of locations that are like a file pool, you'll say, that you have in your back pocket. And then do you ever use services, like a website that has a database of locations, or Craigslist, or?
Yeah, I don't use those resources often enough, probably. I would make my job easier if I use them a little bit more often. Occasionally I will, I'll scan Airbnb and VRBOs when I'm scouting for houses. You tend to find places that feel a little bit, I don't know if fake is not the right word, but they just don't feel as kind of lived in, which can be okay depending on what you're scouting for. And then, the film office of New Orleans, they have some resources online, which I don't use that often, but I will reach out to our folks over at the film office and kind of pick their brains from time to time if I'm in a jam and I'm looking for something, especially if it's something a little bit more, like, let's say it's, an office from the 1970s or something, and I'll have my stable of locations, but I'll have, kind of struck out on all of those. I'll reach out to the film office, and they might have something in their back pocket that, they've got photos of, or at least have a contact for, and send me in the right direction. I probably, I should do that more often than I do, though.
When we're thinking about this idea of going about finding these locations, who do you typically interact with in the scouting part and then in the physical part when it comes to your job, whether it's a production manager or a production designer? Do you collaborate with them? Are you trying to figure out how many tents with them, how many parking spaces, or are they trusting you with that? Or
Sure. So again, while it does, depend on the project to some degree, there is kind of a standard process that one goes through that tends to stay the same from project to project. I would say I am out there scouting on my own or with another location scout or what have you. But the location department is out there scouting first, getting photos of, as many different viable options for a location as we can, and putting them in front of the usually production designer first, and the production designer will give his or her input on those photos, and then generally the production designer will want to go see locations in person prior to the director to kind of vet them. So let's say we scout 20 gas stations and show photos of 20 gas stations. The production designer might narrow it down to 6, and we'll get in the car with the production designer and drive around to those 6 gas stations. And out of those 6, the production designer might select one that he or she thinks is, the most viable option, and might select a handful. And then generally from there, the next phase would be director scouting. And when you're director scouting, basically, let's say I had just gone through that process, scouting gas stations, scouting offices, scouting schools, and scouting fields. And then we would schedule a director scout to get in a van with the production designer, production manager, possibly director, sometimes the DP, director of photography. And in a van, we'll all go to the top 3 or 4 choices for all those locations. Now, those will all be locations that the production designer has kind of signed off on first. From there, we select the top locations, and once we've selected the top locations for each piece, then I try to get those locations under contract.
Has there been a location that's been really difficult to secure or get approval from a production designer or director that they just kept coming back saying this doesn't work?
Yeah, absolutely. And that'll come down to the location itself and what the script calls for, and it'll certainly, as with anything, come down to the actual personalities you're dealing with, the specific production designer or director. But yeah, I did this movie, Kidnap, this Halle Berry thriller vehicle, car chase movie. And there's sort of this climactic scene that they end up at, just this creepy house in the middle of the woods. It's supposed to have this pool and supposed to have this barn that's also accessible. And, they wanted a pretty specific look for it because it's the climactic scene of the film. And not just myself and, a couple other people in our department, we scouted for that location. From the beginning of the film, probably for, a month or two, scouring the greater New Orleans area. And what's funny about this one is I think I found the perfect location for that film. And as I was finding the perfect location for that scene, they had already resigned themselves to filming it at a different location that didn't have two of the 3 elements, didn't have the pool or the barn, but they decided to build the barn and build the pool on this other property. And so here I come in all excited after months of searching with these photos of this perfect house. And they're like, we're going to do it over here. We're just going to build this stuff. Don't worry about it. Which wasn't the most, we're
going to throw money at it.
Yeah, exactly. Which ends up being the answer a lot of the time, and that's okay too.
So speaking of money, you get tasked with creating budgets and trying to figure out how much your department should spend. When you are approached for a project, you might have a line producer might say, hey, we have this much money for locations. What is your typical response to that in terms of, has there been a breakdown for that specifically, or how do you go about figuring out the budget for these different films?
get the fuck out of here. That's what I say when they show me what they think we can do it for. No, I don't. I mean, there's generally it's a back and forth. It's weirdly like a negotiation. Which is maybe not the perfect description of it, but it's pretty close. It's, you know, whether the UPM puts a budget in front of me first or a number in front of me, or I give them my first pass at the budget. There's pretty much always, in my experience, some back and forth in terms of I put something in front of them that's, you know, $650,000, and they say get it down to $400,000, and we end up somewhere closer to like 500 or 550, depending on the mood they're in, how generous they're feeling. And then at the end of the day, you know, hopefully I've kept close to, you know, whatever that final number is. But, you know, it just depends on the project, depends on the production manager you're dealing with. And, you know, you hope to be working with somebody who, you know, is going to have a reasonable vision of what, you know, certain things can be done for. And I'm pretty good at, you know, I take a certain amount of pride in, you know, not being cheap, but, you know, being fiscally responsible. So I think generally, as long as the UPM I'm working with or line producer, as long as if they're reasonable, then we can find a number that we're going to be able to get pretty close on. So far, I haven't had, you know, a ton of trouble in that area in terms of like working with somebody who wants me to get something done for half the amount I think it's going to take, and then we don't find a place where we can, you know, move forward. And I'm sure it'll happen at some point. But
And do you find that after you've done a certain number of projects that creating these budgets becomes easier because you're able to just pull from previous estimates and quotes from vendors, and then you kind of get an idea of how much a house should cost in that neighborhood or a school or something like that?
yeah, absolutely. And there's always some variance. There's always some degree of guesswork. But yeah, that's actually been one of the last 3 years as I've been managing more projects. It's been kind of a fun thing to get to a point where some of the elements in the budget, some of the budget lines feel kind of like puzzle pieces that you can say, oh, I kind of know where this fits and how it fits and how much it's going to be, and start plugging numbers in rather than kind of just calculating in my mind as we go. But yeah, there's always some variability, and you know, you try to give yourself a little bit of leeway in the numbers you put in there without, you know, grossly overdoing it. But it gets easier over time.
When it comes to your job, are there any tools or, you know, apps for your phone, any special equipment you have that make your job easier?
I've got a camera and a phone and a computer, and that's pretty much the equipment that I use. And a car. Couldn't do it without a car. I'd like to be someone that bikes to work, but it's not feasible for me. There's not a lot. I mean, I use an app or a program called SmugMug to load photos. Certainly to load and share photos. Certainly Dropbox and Google Drive are my friends because I store a ton of stuff just in photos and contracts and everything.
So you're uploading your photos to SmugMug, and then what do you do with them once they're there? Do you send them out to part of the team?
Yeah, usually production designer first. But depending on the project, sometimes you share them with everybody, and that's like production designer, director, DP.
Have you ever done any virtual reality 360 photos to show like the room and the light?
No, but I should get into that. I think I would be ahead of the curve.
You could be.
Yeah.
It could be your next thing.
There's an opportunity there for sure. Now I take some pans once in a while, but they're annoying and time consuming because I have to stitch them together afterwards. And, occasionally I'll throw a video in there just to, surprise people and keep them on their toes.
I actually did the 360 on a couple of films, but the problem I ran into was there were hardly any sites you could upload that people could view them. So basically I had to create like a Facebook group because you can view 360 photos on Facebook. But it was the only reason we did it was because some of the crew wasn't gonna be able to come on the Tech Scout. So we wanted the gaffer to be able to see the light and everything.
If I hired you and you sent me a Facebook link as part of your scouting, I would probably fire you right then and there. But I'm not on Facebook, so I'm biased.
Thinking about all things location,
as I always do.
As you always do. What is the hardest part of your job, or what do you dread about what you have to do?
That's a great question, especially, I don't know if it's especially, but for me, and I can only speak for myself, because dread might seem like a dramatic word for me to use, but there's a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress that comes with my job, and that's kind of one of the biggest, I don't know. It's one of the biggest kind of drawbacks I see is that, it's just it's a high pressure industry that moves pretty fast and it's pretty unpredictable. And, if it's a job that you care about and you put a lot of yourself into it, then I think almost inevitably it brings with it a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, a lot of, not necessarily sleepless nights, but nights where you get, 3 or 4 hours and then your eyes shoot wide open and your brain is just moving because it's trying to, get ahead of all the things you have to get done that day. It's my stress level is something I'm constantly trying to work on and manage throughout my career. I think that'll be kind of a career-long or lifelong battle for me.
Like trying to find balance and have you found any solutions to this struggle that you observe?
Sure. I don't think that probably a solution is not something that I would describe as having found, but I've found ways to kind of manage it and maintain. I haven't been meditating recently, but there was a brief period. There was about a year there where I tried to meditate like a few times a week, and I found that helpful. I don't know why I got out of the habit. It's just something like once you're in the habit of it, it's a lot easier to do. And then I think it's I'm in and out of therapy, going to see a shrink, and recently I've been feeling pretty good, and so I haven't been as much. And that's that's not only specifically for work stuff. That's life in general, but certainly a lot of what we end up talking about is work stuff, and just that element of trying to do a great job and care about my job, but not let it get to the point where it's all consuming. And that's the other thing about this industry is it's always long days, and it's always very involved, and people ask a lot of you, and to a certain degree that keeps it exciting and keeps it interesting, but there's a tendency for it to become kind of all consuming. People do 14-hour days one after the other, and part of me wonders how sustainable that is, and just part of me knows that it's not particularly healthy. So it's an interesting thing. I love a lot of elements of my job, but I also kind of look at the way the industry kind of consumes its labor, and I wonder how long will I be doing this?
Yeah, I think going back to the meditation thing, that's something that I've also been trying to do, but I think it's always hard when your schedule's so much in flux, because to create a routine like that, because in our world, you might, like you said, get up at 6 a.m. one morning and the next day at noon. And,
that's right.
you might have all nights one week. So it's trying to create this rhythm that's when you're
elusive.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very elusive. I know. I totally agree. That's well said, and that's true for I brought up going to see therapy, and I think I'm not going regularly right now, partly because I feel pretty good, but it's also partly because of that. It's just hard to have like a weekly or bi-weekly session when you kind of don't know what your schedule is going to be, even day by day. And part of that, I think that to some degree you do have to, and I talk about this with coworkers a lot, is you kind of have to take some of your life to be your own, regardless of what you're doing for a job. Work-life balance, people talk about that, and to some degree you have to be able to say, you know what, this is just something I need to have, whatever it is, whether it's meditation or therapy or working out. You have to have enough power over your life to be able to say, I need to fit this in however many times, like a couple times a week, or around this time once every week. And I think that's important just for a person's health and well-being. And I say that as kind of a hypocrite, because I don't necessarily do a great job of it, but I try to. And I try to preach that, for lack of a better word.
Looking ahead to your future, to things coming up, if there was a dream scenario, what would that perfect film or show look like for you? Is it about the complexity of the show? Is it about the size of the show? Or what attracts you to a project?
Sure. I don't know that I can describe a specific dream scenario, but definitely some of the keywords you just threw out there help kind of spark something like I do. There's really inspired projects that are $200 million, and there's really terrible movies made for $1.5 million, but I do tend to think that some limitation breeds creativity, and to some degree, a larger budget breeds studios making something that they think is easily consumed by consumers, and that tends to be a little bit more brainless. I like operating in that kind of lower budget world, even if it makes my day-to-day life from a work perspective a little bit more challenging, because it does, you have less money to work with, so you got to get creative to solve all the little puzzles and problems that come your way. But I do enjoy kind of a smaller budget film. My personal tastes end up taking me more in the sort of indie realm, and that's sort of, I want to work on a project that interests me. I don't always get to, but that is, I would call that a goal, is to be able to work on more projects that, I find actually to be pretty creative and interesting and original.
Very cool. How do people get in touch with you? Let's say they are shooting a movie and they don't have any locations and they need a location manager. What do they do?
My phone number is...
Well, you have a website, right?
Yeah, I do have a website. You can link people to it. No, I mean, it does depend, but I think for my position, I end up getting a call from the line producer or UPM, and they'll find me because they've A, worked with me before, or B, they've worked with this other location manager who they call first. That location manager is busy. That location manager says, you might try Nick Thomas. So that's usually, the chain that it goes through, is that a line producer starts staffing up, and one of the first positions, if not the first, they'll put on staff is a location manager and location scout. So usually that's where it's coming from.
But for our audience right now, What's the website? How do they contact you?
The website is nickthomas.co.
And you're not on Facebook, is that correct?
I'm not on Facebook.
But you're on like LinkedIn, right? Maybe?
I do have a LinkedIn account. Look for Nick Thomas. I don't know what the actual link
I think
is,
I just found you on there, so you have updated your LinkedIn profile.
It's good to know I'm easy to find. I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me on IMDb. For some reason on IMDb they do a really shitty job. Excuse me, I'm sorry. I don't mean to slander IMDb, but there's a little section, they have your name and they say known for, and they list 4 projects.
But you can edit those.
I don't think I can. I think you have to be an IMDb Pro to edit
It's
them.
easier if you are a pro. I think if you don't have that pro to edit it, maybe you do. I don't know. But pro's like $20 a month. You can afford it.
I'm not paying $20 a month for something just so I can say I want to be known for these 4 projects rather than
No,
these
but that
4
allows you to
terrible
put
ones.
your headshot on the website and people can see what you look like.
That's fun, but I don't think it's worth $20 a month. Is it really $20 a month?
Yes, but you have a discount if you're like
That's crazy.
in a guild or
Nobody should pay
union.
$20 a month to be
I
an
know.
IMDb Pro. So
Hey.
I'm really slandering them. I don't mean to do this. It wasn't my intention going in, but
So, really enjoyed talking with you today, Nick, and
Likewise.
hearing all the nuggets of wisdom. That's all we have time for today. Thank you for listening to the podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please visit us on iTunes, leave a comment, subscribe, and tell a friend. If you'd like to stay up to date with what we're doing, you can visit the blog at assistantdirecting.com and sign up for our monthly e-newsletter where we will notify you of the new episodes and highlight interesting technology and software in the film industry.